Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Delta numbers rapidly declining, so why are we still wearing masks? MCPS students' math proficiency and literacy plummet after a year of virtual classes. Reimagining police. What if there are no cops? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Dean of Democratic Politics, Sam Statland, and former membership director of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Phil Bell. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Throughout the year and a half of COVID-19 classroom shutdowns, there was a healthy debate as to the negative impact on Montgomery County students from a lack of in-person learning and the reliance on virtual teaching. Now there is some data that indicates that after more than a year of virtual classes, MCPS students are less prepared to meet math and literacy proficiency benchmarks than students in previous years. Sam, an article in Bethesda Magazine reports that literacy data presented for the overall student population declined 35% for second graders, 23% in the fifth grade, 10% in the eighth grade, and down 9.2% in 11th grade. And the declines were even sharper for students of color. Did MCPS fail these children?
Casey, in my opinion, MCS has been failing our student population for years, especially when you look at the instances and the grade scores of students of color. We've done just an abysmal job. When it comes to the result of this recent COVID and how it's affected the school system, not only here in Montgomery County, but also throughout the rest of the nation, I'm going to take a really radical approach. What I think we should do is we should just erase this past school year. Those kids that have done very well on virtual learning can progress. Those kids that have not, for a variety of reasons, should just, I hate to say the word repeat, but continue in the grade where they were. I think that's the balanced way to do it and the fairest thing to do. You know, I'm a parent, and of course, I always wanted my kids to go to college, as we all do. And it took me, a while to reach the determination that if my child misses a year of college, they're still going to do okay. And they did. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think we have to be so locked into K through 12, immediately jump into school. And at least within Montgomery County, we have wonderful programs sponsored by the trades and worked on with the trades that allows people to make a really great income without a college degree. And we certainly have put a lot of tools in place in the medical profession, biotech, and education here within the county to give people more opportunity. And that's kind of my view on this.
Well, that was a little broader answer than I wanted really to focus on the decision to go to virtual learning and how effective it was. And so I'm going to ask that question of Phil. There was similar data released regarding performances in math with shocking results. And so it was the decision to go to virtual learning as opposed, and, I guess because, you had to weigh the safety of the students versus the learning capabilities of the students, the right decision.
Absolutely not. It wasn't. First, I want to say I agree with some of what Sam said. Just in an overall sense, we do need to focus on moving people away from the idea of thou shalt go to college. But more to the point here, there was no reason beyond a relatively small period of time where there was a lot of great concern about what was out there for virtual learning. Look, part of the learning process isn't just sitting there and hearing from a teacher, this is 2 + 2, this is 3 + 4. It's being able to study with your friends and fellow classmates. It's learning how to overcome a difficult test. It's doing all of that in that environment. Without that, not only did it make it more difficult for them to learn and understand and take that knowledge with them, but now they are at, as Sam did mention, a disadvantage in terms of their age. while we may not know how long we're going to live, the amount of time that we have to learn and prepare ourselves to be adults is finite. And therefore, that year was taken away needlessly behind COVID. So I
So let
absolutely
me cut you off and ask you Sam's suggestion that we have those that aren't proficient repeat a grade. Is that going to be acceptable to Montgomery County parents?
It wouldn't be acceptable to me. This is where those students who have been hurt by the actions of, the adults in society are going to have to figure out on their own how to overcome it. It's harsh, but this is what happened. And this is why we have to be circumspect about this sort of thing in the future and never let it happen again.
So Sam, I want to go back to your premise about having students repeat a grade, and that's effectively what it is. I mean, that would be a political hot potato. Does anybody really have the guts to make that proposition?
Casey, I don't know whether they have the guts or not, but that certainly is going to be the end result any way you look at it. Kids that did well with virtual learning are going to continue to move on, and kids that didn't, and unfortunately, that's a lot of students who are hurt by virtual learning are going to be lost, and they have to get that education someplace. Let's just have summer school for math and for English proficiency. I think that'll help a lot. And I can tell you that all of the teachers that I know, including several within my family, they're not surprised by these statistics. They were teaching virtually. They realized what they got out of it and what the students got out of it. And they're very disappointed in this academic year. They feel that they couldn't get the job done. And I agree with them. So come up with whatever answer you want. I want to see a solution. And my solution includes helping those kids that didn't do well virtually to either catch up or move forward. And I think that's what needs to be done. Whether people have the political, courage to do so is beyond me. And I guarantee you that the parents that have kids in private schools where this is not an issue, I don't see where they would object. And if I was a parent of a student of color, I'd certainly push for it. And if I was a member of the school board, I would absolutely enforce it.
Well, but Sam, all your solutions are asking these students to pay for bad decisions of administrators, and that's wrong.
Well, not bad decisions of administrators, being at a situation where a person cannot go to school comfortably without getting sick. And we got to wrap it up because Can I finish? And now that we can give inoculations between 5 and 12. I think the schools are going to open up. Just let's give it about another 90 days and see what happens.
Well, we'll talk about the inoculations for COVID in a later segment and whether that's advisable for young people. But before we go on to our next topic, I just want to mention that long-term school board member Patricia O'Neill passed away last week. She'd been on the school board for over 20 years. And I thought she was a very high-class lady, and I honor her service to our community. So I just want to say my condolences to her family. Now we go on to our next topic, which is still about the schools, but it's about a different aspect of things that were part of the MCPS. Many of you may remember the violent locker room attack that occurred at Damascus High School 3 years ago. Earlier this summer, lawyers for MCPS argued that the attack, which included the act of grooming, was not a sexual assault because it wasn't motivated by sexual desire, and implied that this was merely a hazing incident. Sam, I realize that MCPS is facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, but at a certain point, common decency says that you don't make arguments that are so offensive to the community that you should accept your culpability. Should MCPS have not been litigating this issue?
Casey, hazing my choice. I'm going with Judge Bissett, who absolutely said in open court that he felt that this was absolutely a sexual harassment. I understand when you're an attorney representing your client, which in this case is MCPS, you'll go to any extreme to present the best face forward for your client. But this is absolutely, totally ridiculous.
Well, I'm frankly dismayed that the county didn't settle and chose to litigate it because it's a terrible incident. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Phil. We're going to have to take a break now. And when we come back from this short break, recruitment of new police officers is down. Is the county facing a policing crisis? Stay tuned. Welcome back. Bethesda Magazine ought to give me a stipend for the number of times I've promoted them today, and I'm going to quote them again in this segment. Bethesda Magazine reported this week that Montgomery County is facing a shortage of police officers while crime rates soar. The Montgomery County Police Force has been hit by retirement, departures from the force, and recruitment problems related to poor pay and a growing anti-police sentiment by local political leaders. Phil, many complained that low pay and morale is affecting the police force. The General Assembly last year passed legislation limiting the use of force, increasing the use of body cameras, but more importantly, it became the first state to repeal the so-called Police Bill of Rights. Is anti-policing sentiment the reason the county cannot recruit enough police officers?
I think that's part of it, but you have to remember what the confluence of events is happening here. You have the anti-police sentiment that you mentioned, and then at the same time, you have growth in government, which gives the police more and more to do. So on one hand, we're asking the police to do more, to enforce more and more laws that the government creates just because it has decided to. And then we're also telling the people who they're leaning on, oh, you're terrible, you're evil, and whatnot. So we need to do two things. First of all, we need to end this anti-police sentiment. Most of the officers there are doing their job. They want our communities to be safe, and they want to be safe within those communities. And we should respect that. And at the other side, we need to go to our politicians and say, you know what? The proliferation of laws is unacceptable, and stop asking for it ourselves. Because once we do that, they will be able to do their jobs, and they'll have a lot less to do.
Well, those are all good thoughts. And Sam, I want to go to you now. For background, the county generally holds 2 classes a year for recruits. And in January of 2017, there were, get this, 706 applicants, and of which 208 became officers. This year in January, it was down to 483 applicants, but the most shocking number is only 14 people, 14 recruits became officers. Why is this happening?
As Phil said, this is there are many, many issues that are really involved here. I was talking to a friend of mine today on the telephone who is a retired Washington, D.C. detective. When he first started on the force, which is in the 60s, or I guess early 70s, mid 70s, his starting salary was $8,500. And today, when you look at Montgomery County and other jurisdictions, they come in at around $55,000, $56,000. And when you add cost of current dollars and what it's worth, these guys are actually making less than they were before. And furthermore, the budgeting that goes into the police departments is also suffering. Our police, trying to do more, are working with less money, and therefore the departments have less to spend on all kinds of things, recruiting, higher pay, equipment, et cetera, to make the job more pleasant for them. Secondly, my hat goes off to anybody that wants to be a policeman. I don't know of anyone today whose wife would be absolutely enthralled about their husband becoming a policeman, going out the door every day and really being concerned about their safety on the job. I also think that police ought to be able to enforce the law, strictly enforce the law. And I think it's up to the courts also to enforce the law as well. Bringing a case, you bring a case. You can't say that stopping a traffic stop is less important than a domestic violence call. Because in those traffic stops, you find weapons, you find guns, you find people that may be more likely to break the law. I'm not talking about, targeting any people of color. I'm just talking about a general practice. The police don't feel welcome at their jobs. And this is not only true in Montgomery County, but the same thing is true in Fairfax County that we like to so much compare against. Fairfax County had 2 recruiting sessions. they're also understaffed. And both departments say the same thing. There's going to be more retirements in the future. They need more tools to recruit qualified officers, or we will have a problem in the future.
Well,
Sam,
I think real quick, Phil, we have about 30 seconds.
You bring up an interesting point. Why are we bothering people about having weapons? You should be able to legally have guns, and that shouldn't be a problem. We should be focusing on things such as domestic violations and the like, as opposed to simply, hey, what are you doing? We've added more laws that you have to comply with, and we're going to pull you over. If I were an officer, I wouldn't want anything to do with that.
Well,
I agree. I think you're mixing apples with oranges here. It's two different things. If you're stopping somebody for a traffic violation and guns turn up, it's one thing. Directly to going and looking for guns is another. I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
well, we got to wrap it up here. We will come back to this issue, as there are several interesting candidates running for state's attorney this year that have different philosophies about how we go about our policing here in Montgomery County in the future. But we need to wrap this up, this segment up, talking about COVID, because we haven't talked about COVID in at least a week. So at the beginning of August, there was great fear that the emerging Delta variant of COVID-19 would pose a new health crisis. It now appears that some of those fears may have been overstated, at least as they occurred in Montgomery County, because COVID-19 cases are beginning to recede. According to statistics reported yesterday, in the past 14 days, there's only been 1,800 new cases, or about 130 per day in Montgomery County, which is relatively low for an airborne disease. Now, I say airborne disease for a specific reason. It means that this disease is easily transferable and is with us. So, Sam, 74% of those eligible to be vaccinated in Montgomery County have done so. So why is government still pushing vaccinations? It's not going to be possible to reach 100% compliance. Why are we just pushing vaccinations as the only means of controlling COVID?
The figures that I've seen are that we need to reach 85%, and we need to do it countrywide. I think Montgomery County, under the direction of Mark Ehrlich, has done a really great job. I think the health department has, as has the county council when they sit as our health department. We're following CDC regulations. We have one of the lowest infection rates in the United States. Jurisdictions of our size, we're top 10. Our people are safe. Our hospitals are not being overwhelmed. This is the first time in the history of the United States where we've had rationing of healthcare, I believe now in 4 states, because the COVID hospitalization rate is so high, people are getting so sick that elective surgeries and other minor surgeries cannot be handled. And we're making decisions as to who to treat and who to let die. That is not right. We don't have that in Montgomery County. We're going on a right path. We ought to follow that path and stick to it, especially now that we have the opportunity to inoculate the children in our schools, which will make things better. I'm happy with the way Montgomery County is going. I know that I'm safe, I'm healthy, as are my friends and family, members of my community, and soon the kids in the schools.
Sam, much of what you say is correct, but there's some parts of that need to be parsed through. The idea that a single piece of cloth is going to protect us all from the COVID transmission, I think is a fallacy. And I'm not sure that everyone agrees that our children should be inoculated with an unproven vaccination. So Phil, is it time to get rid of the face masks and to learn to live with COVID, that we've transitioned from a pandemic to an endemic, which will be with us forever?
Not only is it time to get rid of the face mask, it never should have been imposed in the first place. Let's take a look at the history. First of all, if you go back to the 1980s, Anthony Fauci, America's guiding light on COVID, said the exact same thing about AIDS transmission. He posited that you could catch AIDS simply by normal household interactions, such as you and I sitting next to each other on the couch and watching football. He was wrong then, he is wrong now. Number 2, let's also think about something that Sam brought up. The idea that that a lot of the hospitals are overwhelmed in some places. Well, there was recently a study that came out that looked at New York and found that the majority of people who were admitted with COVID, even in ICUs, were there for other reasons, and COVID happened to be in addition. Therefore, one of the biggest, and this came out in the Atlantic, a very left-wing magazine, showed that, yes, one of the most, what they say, reliable indicators of the pandemic was really not serving us well at all. There is no reason to continue this. And what is happening is if vaccinations at an 85% or higher level is the goal, there's no reason to get there. You take a vaccine, you still got to put on a mask. You take a vaccine, your kids still have to put on a mask and can't go to school. Why are you going to do it? Hey, if we're stuck with it, why not be stuck with it? It's time for this to end. It's time for the government to eat the fact that it got this terribly wrong and move on. And look, the government's never held accountable anyway. So what's the problem?
Listen,
I want Sam to have the last word. Sam, wrap it up.
I want to point out, and all of us have written articles, that it takes a week to 10 days to get an article published. Where what we're talking about, of rationing healthcare, is a topic that came up this week. As far as comparing Fauci back in the 80s to 30 years, which is over 30 years ago, almost 40, I don't think that that's a fair comparison either. Science
He
changed.
took the same script. He's still reading from it.
Guys,
the same thing.
We have limited time here. I'm going to let Sam finish.
You just can't compare the technology that was there to define transmission of a disease in that kind of a time span. And it's absolutely been proven that the one thing masks do is they prevent, when we exhale, the further transmission of the disease, which is obviously airborne.
Well, I look, Sam, I'm not going to get into disputing what you say. I don't have confidence, personally, that the paper mask that you can buy at Walgreens or CVS does anything to protect me. I think it's more to make me feel better. And unless you're wearing an N95 mask, which holds all the droplets within the mask, it's really just,
Stay tuned next week, folks, for the same debate.
Yeah, next week for the same debate. Carolyn's given us the shut up, wrap up sign. So we're taking the message. Stay tuned for parting shots. Welcome back. Now with parting shots, Phil Bell.
I'd just like to point out the Eco Health Alliance, led by Peter Daszak, has come out and saying they have nanoparticles that can put viruses directly through your skin. Masks don't work.
Thank you, Phil. Sam Statland, your parting shot.
Folks, I'm part of our redistricting commission, and I encourage you to please go to our website. Just Google in Montgomery County redistricting. It'll take you to the site. There's a question that you can fill in and answer and participate in the system for an absolutely wonderful redistricting experience.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for another week of intelligent discussion about Montgomery County's politics and the state of Maryland. I want to thank you for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.